Japan's decision to reinforce its southwestern island chain with new missile deployments has become one of the most closely watched developments in East Asia, drawing intense scrutiny from Beijing and heightened concern across the wider region. As tensions in the Taiwan Strait accelerate and the strategic environment around Japan becomes increasingly volatile, Tokyo is pressing ahead with a defense realignment that officials say is necessary to safeguard the nation's territorial integrity and protect its citizens from what they describe as growing external threats. The center of this unfolding story is Yonaguni Island, Japan's westernmost inhabited territory, and a tiny landmass sitting closer to Taiwan than to mainland Japan. For years, it has been seen as geographically remote and strategically peripheral. But in today's climate marked by Chinese military expansion, recurring incursions near the Senkaku Islands, and a shifting balance of power, Yonaguni is being transformed from a tranquil outpost into a key node in Japan's defense network. Japan's Defense Minister Shinjiro Koizumi confirmed that Tokyo will proceed with its long-planned deployment of medium-range surface-to-air missiles to Yonaguni. He insisted the move is not intended to provoke, but to ensure Japan has the capability to respond to emergencies in its southwestern maritime approaches. He said the deployment is essential to strengthen Japan's deterrence and defense posture. He also underscored that these systems are defensive in nature, part of a broader initiative to reinforce the nation's defensive perimeter in an increasingly contested region. The deployment comes as Japan completes a series of reforms to its national security strategy and expands key capabilities. The country has already increased its defense budget to record levels and moved forward with programs ranging from cyber defense to counter-strike capabilities. The Yonaguni deployment is seen as both symbolic and practical. Symbolic because it signals that Japan is prepared to defend territories long considered too remote to host major military assets. Practical because these islands offer vital vantage points for monitoring the Taiwan Strait and the East China Sea. But the military positioning is only the surface of a deeper and more consequential development. The announcement follows remarks by Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi that have sharply altered the diplomatic environment. In recent parliamentary discussions, Takaichi made clear that Japan views a potential Chinese attack on Taiwan as a direct threat to Japan's own national security. Her statement has resonated strongly across the region, not only because of its content, but because of who said it, the leader of Japan at a time when the strategic landscape in Asia is undergoing profound transformation. Beijing reacted swiftly and sharply. Chinese officials summoned Japan's ambassador and condemned Tokyo's position, accusing Japan of exceeding acceptable limits on Taiwan-related statements. One Chinese diplomat expressed frustration, saying Japan had interfered in China's internal affairs in a way Beijing considered unacceptable. The tension escalated into a diplomatic standoff, with Beijing warning that Japan could face consequences if it continues on this trajectory. For China, the political meaning of the missile deployment and Takaichi's remarks is clear. China views Taiwan as an inseparable part of its sovereign territory and considers foreign involvement a violation of its core interests. Beijing has repeatedly warned that countries that align themselves with Taiwan in military terms risk crossing a red line. In China's view, the deployment is not a defensive move, but part of a broader regional effort supported in part by Washington to constrain China's rise and prepare for a potential Taiwan contingency. These Senkaku Islands, known as Diaoyu in China, form another flashpoint feeding into this growing mistrust. In recent months, Chinese Coast Guard vessels have sailed into waters near the islands with increasing frequency. These incursions have become a flashpoint in bilateral ties and underscore how a localized dispute can merge into wider strategic competition. The presence of Coast Guard formations and naval patrols in contested waters heightens the risk of miscalculation, and Japanese officials fear that any accident, however small, could spiral into a wider confrontation. Meanwhile, Japan's commitment to strengthening its defense presence on Yonaguni is reshaping life for residents there. The island, long associated with fishing communities, open seas and quiet village life, is now becoming part of Japan's broader security umbrella. Construction of facilities, arrival of personnel, and the installation of new military systems have brought both reassurance and unease. Some residents welcome the presence, seeing it as adding protection. Others worry about becoming a target in a conflict involving much larger powers. In Tokyo, government officials maintain that Japan's actions are measured and necessary. They point to China's rapid military expansion, including new aircraft carriers, nuclear submarines, hypersonic missiles, and persistent grey zone pressure tactics. They argue that Japan can no longer view its security environment as stable or predictable. Defense planners cite increasing Chinese air and naval activity near Japan's airspace and territorial waters as evidence that Japan must adapt quickly. In this context, reinforcing Yonaguni and nearby islands is seen not as militarization, but as the natural strengthening of national defense in response to the realities of the region. Behind the scenes, Tokyo's evolving strategy is also being shaped by uncertainty about the future of American security commitments under Washington's shifting foreign policy priorities. While the United States remains Japan's closest ally and the guarantor of Japanese defense through the U.S.-Japan Security Treaty, Tokyo is increasingly aware that global power balances are changing. Japan cannot rely solely on past assumptions and must consider contingencies where rapid self-defense capability becomes essential. For the United States, Japan's moves are consistent with Washington's strategy of encouraging allies to take a larger role in regional security. Against the backdrop of intensifying US-China competition, the United States views Japan's strengthening posture as aligning with its own efforts to maintain stability and deter unilateral changes to the status quo. American officials have publicly supported Japan's right to enhance its defensive capabilities, though they also privately caution against steps that might unintentionally inflame tensions. Taiwan's reaction to Japan's decision has been cautiously positive, seeing it as a sign that Tokyo recognizes the stakes in the Taiwan Strait. Taiwanese officials have long warned that a conflict involving Taiwan would have repercussions far beyond its borders, affecting trade routes, global supply chains, and regional security. Japan, being geographically close and economically interlinked, would face immediate and direct consequences of any crisis in the strait. But while Tokyo's shift is welcomed by some and criticized by others, it represents an undeniable transformation in how Japan perceives its role in the region. Japan is emerging from decades of strict post-war self-restraint and stepping into a more assertive defense posture reflective of today's security landscape. For years, Japanese strategists debated how to adapt to new realities without violating the principles of pacifism enshrined in the Constitution. The current shift suggests that Japan believes its environment has reached a point where deeper engagement is unavoidable. Strategically, the Yonaguni deployment fits within a larger network. Japan is constructing reinforced bases on Amami, Oshima, Miyako and Ishigaki, expanded radar and surveillance systems, improved air defense networks, and increased joint exercises with allies. These steps collectively signal Japan's intent to ensure it is prepared for any scenario, including one involving Taiwan, something Japanese officials rarely spoke about openly in previous decades. Still, the risks inherent in this posture cannot be overlooked. Heightened militarization in sensitive areas poses the danger of triggering unintended escalation. China's reaction to the missile deployment and its diplomatic protests underline how every move Japan makes is closely scrutinized. Even defensive measures can be seen as provocation when viewed through the lens of geopolitical rivalry. Domestic political dynamics also shape this evolving storyline. Prime Minister Takaichi, known for her firm stance on national security, has made the strengthening of Japan's defenses a priority of her administration. She frames the missile deployment not as a shift away from Japan's pacifist principles, but as a necessary adaptation to safeguard peace. Yet her statements linking Taiwan's security to Japan's own have sparked debate within Japan, where public opinion is split between those who support a stronger defense posture and those who fear the consequences of entanglement in a Taiwan conflict. Despite this debate, one sentiment is widely shared. Japan's neighborhood is becoming more dangerous, and the status quo can no longer be assumed. As technology advances, military modernization accelerates and power balances shift, Japan's strategic perimeter is shrinking. What once lay at the margins, both geographically and strategically, is now at the center of Japanese defense thinking. The future of this delicate situation depends on how all parties navigate it. If managed responsibly, Japan's defensive preparations could contribute to long-term stability by signaling clear boundaries and deterring aggression. If mishandled, the mutual suspicion between China and Japan could deepen, increasing the likelihood of misinterpretation or confrontation. But for now, Japan's message is clear. The era of relying solely on diplomatic restraint, while hoping geography will provide safety, is over. The decision to move ahead with missile deployments near Taiwan reflects a strategic recalibration rooted in the realities of a more contested and unpredictable Asia. It marks a moment when Japan, long tied to the post-war pacifist identity, asserts a more forward-looking approach to its security environment. As Prime Minister Takaichi has signalled, there is growing recognition in Tokyo that Japan must be prepared to protect itself and support regional stability in ways that match current challenges. And as Defence Minister Koizumi said, reinforcing the country's islands is necessary to ensure Japan is ready for any emergency. Strengthen Japan's deterrence and defence posture, a statement that encapsulates the urgency driving this policy shift. In the months ahead, the world will be watching closely to see how this deployment shapes the evolving landscape in East Asia. Will it deter potential conflict or increase the risk of misunderstanding? Will it reassure Japan's allies or provoke greater instability? And perhaps most importantly, how will China interpret Japan's expanded role in the region at a time when Beijing is becoming increasingly assertive on issues it deems vital to its sovereignty? Japan is stepping into a new strategic era, and its actions near Taiwan will remain a powerful indicator of how the region prepares for the future. The missile deployment on Yonaguni symbolises not only a change in Japan's defence posture, but also a broader recognition that peace in the region cannot be assumed. It must be actively defended, shaped and maintained amid shifting regional currents.